attending by teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
And hello, Corbin.
Scott Corbin attending via teleconference from Allegan, Michigan.
All right, Scott.
And you have a full contingent, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate it very much. Let me see. What meeting am I running right now? We at Community Action House, we do the approval, the motions and the discussions in a slightly different order, and then there's like an even different order for the other board that I'm on. So you have to forgive me. I think we do a motion first here, right? To approve the meeting minutes.
So move.
Thank you, Tim. A second? Oh, no.
Second.
Yeah, second, right? Yeah, second. Great. Thanks, Nikki. Any discussion or commentary on the meeting minutes?
Nope. Look good.
One of these times I'm going to do a test. I'm going to ask someone something about the minutes, and then we'll see.
Well, they're not overly elaborate.
Right.
All right. Well,
Reminds me of that they're from East Lansing, i.e. Spartan.
Just what they need to be and nothing more.
There you go.
Okay.
Great. Cool. All right. Well, with that, all in favor of approving the meeting minutes from last time, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much, Tim and Nikki in particular. Public comment time. So we've got some folks joining us. If you would like to speak. I can't see everyone right now. I don't know why my gallery view is weird, so I apologize if I don't see your hand being raised. How do I do this?
Jacob, I think you can just unmute and start talking and you'll pop up.
Can do. Awesome. Yeah, so hello, my name is Jacob Vanderst and I live at 40th East 16th Street here at Holland. I'm a senior student at Hope College and I'm the co-president of the Hope Advocates for Sustainability, which is a student group that focuses on sustainable development. First of all, I just want to say that I'm very grateful for your service in Holland. I've lived in Holland for the past 3 years here at Hope, and I'm very happy that our progressive little city increasingly uses alternative, cleaner forms of power to meet our energy needs. There are a lot of myths and falsehoods around renewable energy that I would like to address right now. For example, state officials in Texas have been blaming green energy when they lost power during the recent winter storms. However, blaming green energy for their power outage is based on a large misunderstanding. A big part of Texas's problem resulted when their energy equipment froze during winter storms, shutting down their wells, pumps, and gathering lines at natural gas, coal, and nuclear facilities. Their wind turbines shut down too. However, unlike Michigan and other northern states, Texas hasn't invested enough in weatherproofing its energy grid from the cold. They didn't expect these conditions, and it was not the technology that failed, but the lack of preparation for adverse conditions. The suggestion that alternative energy sources like wind turbines froze up because they are inferior energy sources is an oversimplification. Just as gas, coal, and nuclear facilities in Texas were ill-equipped for such temperatures, the same was true for their specific turbines. Others operate in harsh conditions all over the world, like wind turbines in the North Sea in Europe, where thousands of wind turbines run all year. Texas's reliance on fossil fuels scours their land and is not viable long-term. During this past December, I actually drove across the state of Texas and passed through hour-long stretches of land featuring nothing but oil drills, and these drills were not operating due to the limits of oil extraction. Green energy is the way forward, and it must be implemented. To bring things back to Holland, I'm pleased that our Board of Public Works continues to look to renewable energy sources to power us through. Texas is stuck in a fossil fuel paradigm that won't likely change soon. I want to encourage the BPW and the City of Holland to keep moving in the direction it's going with renewable energy. We need to keep in mind that when we implement new green energy sources, we need to build them to withstand extreme weather conditions. Ultimately, I support the Holland Climate Collaborative's push to cut everyone's greenhouse gas emissions by 50% every 10 years. We can do this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would also
Stanley.
Public comment, thank you. Hi, my name is Shanley Poole. I live at 932 Chelsea Court. And first of all, I just want to thank you all again for the work you do. It continues to be so important. I live in Holland. I work in Holland. In fact, I was born here, raised here. Someday I probably will raise my own children here. And Holland has a lot going for it. I can walk many places. It's biker friendly. I have access to fresh food from local farms and farmers markets. Things are local enough that my husband and I currently are actually a one-car family. All of this means that we use less gas and release fewer CO2 emissions. But I know I can still reduce my carbon footprint and do better. And I know that West Michigan as a whole can do better. The next step is driving an electric vehicle, a step that continues to grow increasingly more accessible as our state's auto industry focuses more and more on producing electric vehicles. As a woman in her mid-20s, I can even imagine that I will probably spend the majority of my life driving an electric vehicle as they become a standard instead of just a novelty. Some of you might already know that General Motors, one of Michigan's largest employers, says it's going to stop making diesel and gasoline-powered cars and trucks by 2035. That is less than 15 years from now. And GM also plans to use 100% renewable energy to power all of its facilities by 2030, less than 9 years from now, and become carbon neutral by 2040. So here's my point. The future of energy production and use is clean, it's green and renewable, and the future is close. It's time for Holland to follow GM's lead. It's time to introduce more green power into its energy portfolio, including adding more electric vehicles to the city's fleet of cars, trucks, and other vehicles. By doing so, we can inspire more residents to switch to electric vehicles as well. This would go a long way towards answering the Holland Climate Collaborative's call to cut every city resident's greenhouse gas emissions by 50% every 10 years, a goal which I fully support. Thank you so much again for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Thanks, Shanley. Anyone else like to share? All right, great. Well, thanks everyone. Where's my little doohickey there? Great. And then the receiving of the online public comments.
And I don't
I'll-
see anything added there, Mr. Chair. So I
Yeah.
think that means that since our last meeting, I don't believe either in this or at the council level, we received any.
That feels surprising to me, but
It does, but I get them, on other items, certain zoning things that are going on in the community too. My inbox fills up really quickly. So I think that that's actually accurate, but if we were in error in any way, I'm sure that Cinco will pick those up and catch them next time. But because there isn't an attachment there, I don't think there were any.
yeah, I was wondering about that. So I guess people just don't care about what we're doing anymore.
Hey,
I doubt that, Mr.
thanks
Chairman.
for generating more emails for us, Brian. I appreciate that.
I'm teasing. Keith at cityofholland.org. Keith
No,
at City of
no.
Holland. I'm teasing again. Come on, everybody playing along at home. You get it.
Oh, that's a good one.
All right.
Okay.
Poor Keith down in Holland, Texas. All right.
I'm
Great.
happy to get public input at any time during business hours.
Fair enough. Okay. Cool. Well, that was quick. Education. We are going to review what we talked about last time or learned about last time. And then we're going to get an update on transportation from our friend Dave. And that'll be the meat and potatoes. We'll have an update from Joe a little bit after that, but that's what we're doing today, folks. We're talking education, and then we're going to learn about transportation. So
Great.
unless people want to slide anything else in right now, I'm going to hand it over to Dave.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, actually, what we hope to do here, a couple things. One, I know Ann Salyers is on the line, and she, you know, as you all know, she presented last meeting the topic of education and reviewed what had happened over the years since the community energy plan had been put in place and what currently the tactical action team is working on. And as you know, they're developing a set of recommended strategies guided somewhat by your input as we've gone along here on prioritization. And so Ann did emphasize, you know, the commercial and institutional and industrial areas as being some major opportunities for education and engagement. And so, but that is a work in progress. We have a steering committee meeting coming up later this week. We hope to review that plan that's being put in place by that tactical action team that Ann highlighted a little bit about last meeting. And hopefully it'll be at a point here fairly soon where you can actually receive the full draft document of the actual education plan and have input into some of the priorities around those strategies that we can include with the other items on the opportunity matrix. So, but I just want to pause here a minute. If anybody in reviewing what we talked about last week or last meeting wants to bring up any additional questions they had about Ann's presentation or feedback or dialogue before we dive into transportation, I'm sure Ann would be available to engage on that as well.
Of course, I will see. Come on, don't talk up.
Okay.
I have a question. It's the same question I have with the working draft further down on the agenda. And it is, at the beginning, it says CEP mission. And so I don't know, we haven't really discussed the mission that we all agreed on. Is it the mission that was way before? Are we going to rework the mission a little bit? In the draft document, the, what do they call it? Report and recommendations to City Council working draft. There's material, and then kind of at the end are the questions I think we need to discuss before I feel like I can comment on the other stuff, because we haven't answered some of those questions. So in the beginning of the education, I'm glad I have it to look at, because it, when you just have someone read it to you and you're just quickly looking at it, I didn't have a chance to think. So I think that at the beginning, that first page, CEP mission, is that the mission that we agreed on, that it enhances, first of all, Holland's attractiveness to business and investors and residents?
Nikki, can I just want to make sure I'm looking at what you're talking about here. Where are you referencing the CEP mission?
The Holland Community Energy Plan, the Energy Education Plan that was.
Oh, got it.
Isn't that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Or we just,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So
I just wanted to make sure I was looking at the same stuff.
Clear that we're all on that same page. Other than that, as the slides go on, I don't know, pages, slides, I see some redundancies. I'm a critic. I'm an English, a writer major. So they're just those small issues that I personally have. But I think we need to agree on some of these things. And I don't know, and just some of the redundancies. We've talked about this, and then it comes up again. It's also, unless we want repetition to get the message through, that's another thing. So I don't know what went into this, and I can't guess what the ultimate goal is with this or what we're going to do with this. So I'm just asking those questions. I fully appreciate the time and effort, which is, I see that it's been huge. So
Yeah, I'll let Ann maybe speak to that because I know she created the specific, her team, actually the team, including, Mark Vanderplug and others, in that tactical action team. But the slide I think that you're maybe referring to as well as the second slide. Well, I'm going to repeat it today because the mission is, that was the previous, I guess that's the summary of the mission from the community plan as it was adopted by the city of Holland's city council. So, I mean, that's the adopted plan. So I guess that when we refer to it, it is in the historical context about as the plan was adopted, but I don't know. And is that verbatim? I know the slide we're referring to is the one with the house, the CEP house graphic, and then it talks about the mission on there. Anything you want to add to that, Ann?
No, you're right. It's lifted straight out of the document that was adopted, and there wasn't any discussion on, is that the right mission? That discussion seemed out of scope with our project. And so I think, for SDT, that would be a separate discussion. It certainly would feed the education plan if it does change. And, as far as the redundancies you see, Nikki, yes, that happened in part because each kind of segment of that report was written separately. And so, we'd be happy to comb through and take some of those out. So, give me your suggestions on ones that aren't necessary.
all right. Okay, and I with the mission, and I understand it was from the original CEP, but I understood that was developed with the idea that it would adapt to changing conditions, technologies, market conditions, legislation. So we may want to think about really looking at that and seeing if that's exactly what we want now.
Right. There has not been a formal revision of, the mission, what's in the original report.
Mhm.
So Nikki, I'm sorry. So do you have a specific, what's your specific?
Yeah, on page 5, page 5, CEP mission. Is that our mission? Do we agree on that? And the same thing comes up in the other document too. I'm not sure we've discussed that to have that down there. So I am suggesting that while we can tighten up this document, the education document, that beginning page, I think, needs discussion. And if we all agree, that's great.
Okay. So your question is, does the mission as it's currently written, which is from the original report and sign off from city council, is that
Still our mission.
Still our mission as it's written?
As it's written. So we don't have to discuss that now because we have an agenda, but hold that before we approve that whole thing, I would say.
And I'm looking at, and just because I want to, Zoom can be tough here. So I'm looking at the Holland Community Energy Plan, developing an energy education plan overview delivered by Ann last time we met. And there's the title slide, there's a learning outcome slide, and then the third slide is the CEP mission.
Correct.
And the words and the bullet points on this slide is what you're referring to?
Mm-hmm. And do we want those orders? And we discussed this a long time ago. And since we decided to go ahead with our research, now I'm revisiting this. Is this what we want? Is this our mission? Do we want to revise it? Is it, are we going to revise it as we adapt? I listen to, all the input from the public says, we're concerned about climate change. We want to do this and want to do that. That is never mentioned. We're always talking about increasing our energy efficiency or effectiveness.
Yeah, but that
And I'm
statement
not
does,
sure is our initial goal continue? Will it continue to be make Holland attractive to business? Or are they more equal? Or is one come to the fore more than the others? I don't think we've really addressed that fully. So that's the slide I think
Okay.
we'll just hold in mind.
Yeah.
Unless everyone agrees, and this is a team approach, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. My sense is that we're sort of on a path that we, good reminder that this is still an important thing that you want to dig into, which is great. My sense is we're still sort of on the getting into each of the levers and, chewing on those. And then once we're through those, we'll learn about transportation today, and we have the facility, the built environment coming up over the next couple of months. I think that will be, and then we got public feedback and all that kind of stuff, which I think is a very important part of, I guess, if we were to revisit the mission, hearing where businesses and individuals are at related to this stuff in a more intentional way than, the folks that are paying attention to this conversation and submitting ideas are, they're likely going to have a particular point of view. So for us to go out and get public engagement intentionally, I think all that good research and learning, I think will inform a much more robust conversation around the mission, in a couple of months is my take. If, whether we decide to do something with it or not, I think then, at least for me anyways, I'll feel a lot more opinionated having gone through these other things in the meantime. But I'm happy to be overruled in that regard. But that's how I'm thinking about it, is good reminder that this is still important to you to focus on.
Okay. Thanks.
Brian, I think that's good perspective. When you get into engaging the public, it does have a way of coming back around to inform adequacy of mission. Dave, I see you shaking your head. When we went through the Holland Waterfront project, getting a lot of input on the public, it did come right back into word clouds, things like that came back into, clear mission statement. It just has to be intentional and thought about when we're doing that.
yep.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions for Ann and Dave about the education presentation from last time and what they're working on? And
Good.
And then just a reminder, so kind of the rhythm that we're getting in on this is, the detail, Nikki, I'm sure Ann would be fine with you kind of working on the detail of what's in that. But again, you guys as a group are strategy level, right? And then remember that with the opportunity matrix, we're kind of talking about what strategy level things would be assigned to different groups that within periods of time then are using the strategies that you guys discuss, make a recommendation to council on, and then that group works on the details.
Mm-hmm.
So Nikki's kind of and I love it, right? Nikki's I'm a detail person, and some of this language is kind of driving me nuts.
Well,
So,
we have it. Yeah.
And that's great, right? So you can
language.
send that to Ann, but again, kind of you guys' assignment is to take a look at the strategy level. So
Right.
after we made that presentation in the education and the opportunity matrix, then at some point we're going to circle back with you guys and say, okay, here were kind of the things that are at least in play as specific strategies in each of the levers.
Mhm.
And then that kind of is what goes back into eventually your report and recommendation to council to say, okay, here are the strategies. And you guys don't have to work out the details on all of that, because then that would get assigned to groups that exist that then over the next period of years are working strategies to deliver the results that we're all looking for.
Well, yes, and I think we need concepts and then the strategies. Yeah, details are for committees, I agree.
Yep, so if you have ideas for concepts on education, from what Ann presented last time, now would be a really good time. And of course, you can do it later too.
And just, you know, as we told you last time too, the plan that is being developed from that tactical action team isn't completely done yet. So you're a little bit at a disadvantage of being able to really look at all the details of what they're identifying, those strategies, but it should be soon. I mean, I think if our steering committee can look at it again this coming week, and then hopefully we can get something to you that's at least the draft plan, it's an entirety, then hopefully that'll help you identify within there what you see are the priorities within that plan, and that can give you some emphasis around a strategic direction on the education piece for the implementation going forward. So we know that you're kind of dealing with it from kind of a high level presentation standpoint. You'll have a little bit more meat and potatoes on it here, hopefully fairly soon, to be able to chew on.
Thank
Brian and Keith, I just have to excuse myself for only about 10 minutes. I'll be back.
All right, we'll move up in the agenda, the part where we talk about you, Boyd.
Well, Boyd picked the right time to move on since it's my time for the presentation now.
Whoa.
So
Mr. Transportation.
I'll go ahead and dive in
Mhm.
at this point. I'm going to try to see if I'm better about sharing the screen this time. Let me see here.
Mm.
All right. What are you seeing?
We small, at least
Small
on my
version?
screen.
We're
Okay.
seeing the presenter view.
All right. Here we go.
There you go.
Is that better?
Full screen.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay.
Full
Very
screen.
good.
Good.
Well, thank you all for, again, your commitment to this effort and gaining some background and understanding and exploration about what were the journey we've been on in the pursuit of the community energy plan over the last 10 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about transportation today. This does not include, obviously, everything that's happened in the community. There's been a lot of other activities that maybe don't get referenced in here. I'll try to point them out along the way, but there's, I think, a good amount of our work in here. And I'll bring up the dreaded slide again right away here. Here's the mission.
There we go.
And this is not intended to be, again, this is not intended to suggest that this needs to remain the mission. This is the mission as it was adopted and as the plan was originally adopted. And as a staff, I think, you know, when you have an adopted plan, you're going to refer back to that as being the basis for it. And that's what we're trying to do here. This slide really is only intended to point out that among all of the deep energy improvements that is identified in the community plan, transportation, which is highlighted here, is one of those areas that is contemplated within the community energy plan. And specifically, what's talked about there is you can find a conversation about transportation on page 28 of the community plan. And the community plan really takes a base case. Remember, that was going to bring us to 37 metric tons per capita by 2050 if we didn't do something. The base case assumed really about 0.5% growth in vehicle miles traveled, and that the efficiency and the mix of the vehicles would remain about the same as it is today. And at the time, there was no real significant use of electric vehicles in Holland. So if you think about the strategies going forward, you know, what's going to change that trajectory? there are a lot of strategies that the community plan put forward on energy improvements in buildings, a different energy mix in terms of the portfolio it's supplying, electricity in our community, all these different avenues of pursuing efficiency. Transportation was part of that. And the strategies that were suggested on page 37 of the document, there is a recommendation to the community that we recognize and encourage an evolution of a wider market to more fuel efficient, lower emitting vehicles. So not just electric vehicles, but also looking at more fuel economy in the vehicle fleet that's out there over time, and considering lower emission vehicles as part of that, and then also the adoption of electric vehicles, especially as our portfolio for electricity continue to improve. Further, if you look on page 38, more specifically, what it talks about there is that if our transportation gains that they're estimating in the plan going forward to bring us to 10 metric tons per capita over the 40-year period of time include transportation efficiency gains that come primarily from revised federal fuel vehicle standards for fuel economy and weight reduction, smaller vehicles and more efficient drivetrains. And a small portion would come from slightly denser urban design and walkability impacts of expanded snowmelt services in the city of Holland. And the detailed assumptions behind those transportation efficiency gains are described, and it was labeled as Appendix 9. It turns out actually that was a typo. It's actually Appendix 6. So if you want to refer to the community plan, look at some of the specific assumptions that were in there, you can find that in Appendix 6 of the community plan. Over the first, I would say, 6 or 7 years of the plan, there was not a lot of work done on transportation. The initial task forces that were launched when the community plan was adopted really focused on residential home energy retrofits, commercial and institutional buildings, greening our electric portfolio, studying district heat, a lot of those working on building labeling, a number of different aspects, but transportation was not a primary focus. I think part of the reason was we hadn't done a lot to really change our portfolio from an electric standpoint yet at that time. After Holland Energy Park was put in place, we had also brought about 32 megawatts of wind into our portfolio. We really dramatically improved our megawatt or our carbon intensity of our electric production. And the strategic development team that convened in 2017 recognized that and said, I think we have an opportunity to focus on some things related to the transportation sector now that we have an improved carbon portfolio, carbon performance in our electric portfolio. And so out of all the tactical actions or strategies actually that were put forward in 2017 and actually put in place with the 2018 strategic development team recommendations in February of 2018 to City Council, 3 of those were based upon transportation. You see those in red there. Incentivizing electric vehicle adoption, drafting a alternative fuel and electrification policy for vehicles in the city. As it turns out, we've expanded that, as I'll talk about a little bit more. And then studying and plan for the impact of autonomous vehicles on infrastructure. So making sure that as we're developing new infrastructure in our community, we're thinking about the automotive fleet of the future and especially autonomous vehicles. So I'll highlight again, those 3 items in a little bit more detail and what kind of activities have happened associated with that. So the first one is incentivizing the EV adoption. The goal that was put forward at first was supposed to be twice the state of Michigan's rate for electric vehicles. And it was assumed that at the time, the state's average was about, I think, 1.5. Turns out that when you look at the state's data, they consider electric vehicles being hybrid as well as all battery powered. So we wanted to really kind of focus a little bit more in this group. The group decided to focus a little bit more on the plug-in type of vehicles and especially the battery electric vehicles. So these are ones that really rely almost entirely on battery for its support. And if you look at those at the state of Michigan, the actual state average is about a half of a vehicle per 1,000 people. So half a BEV per 1,000 people. So that wasn't quite enough just to do 2 times. So the group has adopted trying to get to a 5 times the state average on that level. Which still, I think what we'll find is that Holland has actually been fairly progressive as a part of the state. If we did 5 times the state, that would put us at a number of about 84 battery electric vehicles in our community by 2021. And at the time, when we look at the group kind of kicking off their work, we were at about 49 in the community. So that'd be a net addition of about 35 new battery electric vehicles. So one thing is important to kind of look at, well, what's the carbon impact? You know, if you think about a battery electric vehicle, and we're talking about carbon as being a metric in the community energy plan, what is the carbon impact? So a gallon of gasoline consumed in a vehicle produces about just under 20 pounds of carbon dioxide per gallon consumed. And if you look at the average fuel economy of our car fleet in the United States, about 25 miles per gallon, that means that a gas car, on average, emits just under 80 pounds of carbon dioxide per 100 miles driven. You contrast that with electric, and especially with Holland Energy Park being in place and the wind and the renewable energy that we have in our portfolio. When you look at Holland's concentration, remember Andrew Reynolds' presentation on the calculation of our footprint. A battery electric vehicle consumes about 24 kilowatt hours of electricity per 100 miles. So kind of putting in that same standard. And then looking at BPW's fuel mix, there's about 1.14, 1.15 pounds of CO2 that's emitted per kilowatt hour. So if you think about that, then a battery electric vehicle is actually responsible for about 28 pounds of emissions from our power generation for the same 100 miles that are driven. So that's a savings of about 50 pounds of CO2 per 100 miles. Now, all of that obviously can be avoided if you also elect for 100% renewable energy, you know, to be your source of power for charging your vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So what have we done? Primarily, we've looked at incentives and education as being a key factor in this. And the incentives that we put in place both are on the residential level and on the commercial level. And so at the residential level, anybody in our system, and this isn't just in the city of Holland, this could be in our wider BPW territory, has the opportunity to invest in a home charger. And if they elect to go on the whole house time of use rate, they can have a rebate of $300 if it's non-Energy Star charger, or $325 if it's an Energy Star charger. So there are different grades of chargers that are out there. We think there's an overall benefit not only to the electric utility, but also to the carbon impact in the community. So we didn't want to limit it only to Energy Star. That's how the program kind of started out. But recently found out that Tesla does not have Energy Star rated chargers. So we've flexed it a little bit to allow for and incentivize all types of chargers. But there's a little bit of a kicker if you have an Energy Star type charger. Our commercial institutions can actually get up to a $1,500 rebate for that. And we're evaluating these direct current fast chargers. We do not currently have any in Holland at this point. I'll talk about that a little bit more on a state of Michigan level. But that's the next step that the team is looking at, is what kind of incentives would we do, or how would we actually look at that as it relates to some of these fast charging applications. So if you do sign up for the whole house time use rate, we actually provide an incentive as well, not just the rebate, but also if you charge at night, you're taking an existing rate for energy of around 5 cents per kilowatt hour, and you're actually reducing that to 3.5 cents for the energy portion of the rate if you're charging between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m. essentially. I'm sorry, 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. But you're going to pay a penalty if you charge during the middle of the day. And part of that is we know as we adopt more EVs in our community, it's going to add additional demand to our electric system. Well, if we can put it in place where we don't have to add new distribution infrastructure, we wanted to create that financial incentive for customers to do that. But we also want to make sure that there's, on the other side of it, if they are charging during the middle of the day, that, and we do have to invest in that transmission infrastructure, we're building some revenue source to help us put that in place. So it's really kind of a carrot and stick approach to the time of use rate. And so that is in place right now. And just along the way here, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and interrupt me if you have any questions along the way. Part of the education piece, and to help our customers, we've created a Facebook page called Charge Up Holland. And you do not have to be a owner of an electric vehicle to be on this Facebook page. It is a closed group, but all you have to do is request to be in the group, and you will be admitted to that group, and you can then share information with other people that are interested in electric vehicles or those that currently are operating them. Just a good opportunity to get people in the community collaborating and discussing together on vehicles. And so we've created that as a place for where people can meet. We've also done some outreach to our dealerships in the area as well to make them aware of our rebate program so that they can make that known for people that are coming in and looking at electric vehicles, that they can help kind of put that together with the entire package of incentives that they're helping on the sale of the vehicle at the point of sale.
I hope we have a picture of Mr. Hemingway and his vehicle on that Facebook page.
It's actually Mrs. Hemingway.
Dave, are you going to talk about the supply of chargers that the municipality has in place now at some point?
Yeah, let me back up on that a little bit. It's a great point. I'm going the wrong way here. So what Boyd is referring to is that we've actually, early in the period of time of the Clean Energy Plan, one thing we did do in Holland, and it wasn't so much about the Clean Energy Plan at the time, it was just about the fact that we had a very significant industrial concentration of advanced energy manufacturing. And you still see that today. I mean, LG Chem obviously is a big entity here, Johnson Controls at the time. And now you have Volta Power Systems as well in our area. So there's a lot of interest in development on advanced energy systems. What we did is there was an opportunity to receive a grant through some of the stimulus funding at the federal level to support the installation of charging stations in the community. And so we actually, through that grant, were able to receive 17 charging stations that we then put in. Eventually became 18. And the cost to install those was about $5,000 a piece, and but the station itself was paid for by the grant. For a while, that was something that the BPW administered that program and essentially set those stations up and made those available. All those were charge point stations. So if you were on a charge point network, you could, through your app, find out where they were in Holland and go and charge up your car. Our goal there was sort of a learning program. And one of the things that we learned about in speaking to ChargePoint and to other communities was that Holland had not yet, created a fee for the use of that. And that was not really sustainable long-term. As a matter of fact, it would be in violation of some of our Revenue Bond Act covenants if we continue to give electricity away. And so we kind of had a choice to make about creating our own fee or conversely, transferring the ownership of those charging stations to the users at the locations that they were, the entities at the locations where they were. And one of the things that we found out was that different end users have different incentives and different pricing schemes that they want to put in place for the charging. For example, Target stores believes that their research shows that there's an additional dollar spent for every for every minute that somebody is in the store. So, they wouldn't want to necessarily punish somebody for having their vehicle plugged in too long, at a Target venue. Conversely, in the Downtown Development Authority region on the DDA group in our principal shopping district, there's an interest in not having somebody just come and use a spot, all day long. So they want to actually incentivize potentially a different situation where maybe it's very low cost for a couple hours, but then they want them moving out of that spot and some turnover there. So what we did a few years ago is we actually transferred ownership of those charging stations to the end users so that they could put in, the proper fee system that they wanted to for that. And that's been, in our mind, a more successful approach to that, as it really sort of identifies or allows them to identify what's most appropriate for their end users at those locations. And so not all charging stations remain. A good number of them still do. And now they are in the hands of the end users at those locations.
Do you view in the future that the BPW would play a role in further development of charging stations, or leave it up to the private sector?
I think our role is to incentivize to where it makes sense for the electric utility, and then to work with them on getting those in place, but probably not playing a role in as much. Now, I will say the exception to that, and that's something we're looking at in terms of these direct current fast chargers, is there a role to play just from a utility standpoint to put a fee system in and actually own a direct current, fast charger? So I think we'll continue to explore that. And maybe the jury's still out on that a little bit, but on some of the lower level charging, our belief is at this point, the ownership is better in the end user hand, and our role is more of an incentivizing role, just as we're doing with the residential and commercial. So you still can get a $1,500 incentive to put one in for a commercial use. You just would be the end user and the owner of it at that location.
Mm-hmm. Just another example where the BPW doesn't have ownership, right, but can have influence.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for that question.
Dave,
Couple of, I'm sorry,
all right,
Jeff, go
one more
ahead.
question related to that. So for the DC fast charge for like Electrify America stuff, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Like the public competitor to Tesla's charge network. So for that, is that typically owned privately, or is that typically owned at the utility level?
Yeah, actually, most of that is owned privately. I'll tell you that there's a slide that I have coming up kind of talks about the state of Michigan's work, and there you'll see about 1.7 million of grant monies that have gone into funding some chargers. And for example, the Electrify Corporation actually is one that is working at, I think they have eight of them throughout Michigan that are within Meyer, that Meyer Stores, for example, has received. And there's a number of others that are private end use. It looks like most of the awards for chargers went to private end users, then went to utilities, for example. And so, that's what I'm seeing as a trend anyway. It doesn't mean that it has to be exclusively that way. Like I said, we're having discussions about whether or not there might be grant monies to support something where the BPW might be an owner of a DC fast charging unit within our area, or a couple of them. But a lot of the awards that we've seen today have gone to private end use.
Dave, and maybe you'll get at this, what's the BPW's sort of future perspective on, regardless of the way I look at it, and this is probably wrong, but the way I look at it is it's a, the BPW, this is an opportunity, it's a market share opportunity for revenue, regardless of whether there was a CEP or not, right? This is not going anywhere. And in theory, the quicker there's a robust infrastructure, the easier it will be for people to make these purchasing decisions.
Right. So Brian, to that point, if you look at the rebates that are here, what the BPW does have, it's called a line extension policy. So if a new customer wants to come into town and we need to build out a new service to them, our terms of service right now say that we'll look at the net revenues to the utility, and we will not make them contribute anything to the capital investment if the net revenues to the utility over the next 4 years pay for that investment. So that's precisely the type of analysis we used when we looked at the rebates for the charging station. So that $300 in our mind represents a customer that's putting in a charging station at home. And then with the amount of charging they might be doing and the amount of revenue the BPW might see over an appropriately timed situation. So we're looking at, like at night, that differential between 5 cents of energy versus 3.5 cents. And then also the distribution revenue that comes in on our rate structure over that period of time generates enough revenue to pay for the $300. And that's how we did that over the 4-year period of time. So really the entire incentive on the BPW's part is really consistent with our policy on line extension is the way that we did that. So it really is a revenue driven sort of approach to it.
So in theory, if you wanted to just spread your money out further to hypothetically increase adoption, you could say instead of 4 years, we're just going to push it to 8 and make it 600, and it would all still. Is that oversimplification?
Yeah, I mean, it would take a policy direction change on the part of the board of the city council in order to do that, because again, what we look at there is the risk proposition. If somebody would close up in a year after putting in a facility, that's probably fairly unlikely. Is it likely that they're there after 4 years? It's still fairly likely, but from a risk investment standpoint, the 4 years has been the policy for that extension of our capital, essentially to recover the revenue over that period of time. If we look at longer term than that, it starts to become a little bit of a riskier proposition. But I mean, that again would be a policy decision.
Relative to the charging stations, though, or I mean, I guess it depends if it's a residential versus like partnering with a business to put 10 or 15 charging stations, or partnering with the city to put in public lots more. That's not exactly the same context, really.
Right. And there again, I think, that's where the $1,500 comes in, as we expect there'll be a lot more revenue in those commercial applications. So we're already kind of doing that, but at the residential level, it's based upon that single car probably coming into that single charging unit is the typical situation. So that's, again, we're learning as we go. And if there's something that proves to be a different situation there, I think we could look at changing some of those policy directions. And I think you see that kind of by adopting even the non-Energy Star rated. That was a limiting factor right now because the Tesla charger isn't an Energy Star charger. Right. But we didn't want to shoot ourselves in the foot on that in terms of, getting incentive out there for people to adopt, electric vehicle for their usage.
Yeah.
Dave, I'll just add in there too, as far as the 4-year horizon, I know I came in after this has already been done, but as technology continues to change, we'll see how long what's the lifespan of an actual charger. And maybe they'll lock in a little bit longer, but I think that's kind of a factor that was part of the conversation also, especially in the commercial and industrial uses.
Dave, the only other thing that caught my eye was on the daytime rate with changes to more home office work now, and hitting 12 cents. Yeah, 12 cents during those working day hours. Just kind of makes you pause with this COVID world and post-COVID, will home office be a thing that sticks around? And are we penalizing those who are now at home?
Well, and you can keep the rebate. You can keep the rebate, Boyd, if you go off the time of use after a year. You are obligated to stay on for a year. It's probably very difficult to tap significantly into that $300 over the first year.
Okay.
But if you decide after a year that, hey, I've got the rebate, I've enjoyed the time of use, but it doesn't fit my lifestyle anymore, you can decide to go back to the normal rate schedule for the BPW at that point. The issue here is we know that if there's not if there's not a good use of the charging at night, then as adoption continues to grow, we will likely see that we'll have to make additional investments in our distribution infrastructure. So we think that there's reason to try to incentivize it that way. I totally understand that times are different this year, for example, than what they were even a year ago or 2 years ago. And maybe that'll change 2 years, 2 years from now, again, maybe the other way, or maybe it'll be something that sticks. The other piece of that, the reason we did a whole house time of use, it's probably good to explore that a little bit too, is that the charging stations themselves have the data, but ChargePoint was going to start making us incur a fee for accessing that data that would quickly absorb, any incentive that we provided for the charger itself. So by going to total time of use on the entire house, we can still use one central metering point that we have anyway, as opposed to adding additional infrastructure just for the purposes of metering that. Now, I will say this. I think that cars with their smart technology are going to continue to evolve. I mean, when we were visiting Ford recently, one of the things that we found out is that they each have kind of their own proprietary system for reporting back their own usage out of the car itself to an app that you might have. And so, if that's happening between that app, are we going to get to a point where there's a common protocol and now we don't have to actually have a meter hookup, to be able to discern how much has been charged on the vehicle versus the usage in the house? So I think data will continue to evolve on that, and we just need to be prepared to be able to interface with that, maybe to take advantage of more targeted rate programs that are associated with that charging usage.
That's interesting. Yeah. Neat.
Any other questions at this point for Dave? I know you're partway through still, Dave. I just want to.
Yeah, no, I wanted just to highlight a few other things here on this particular tactical action. Is that, as was pointed out in a public comment today, very significant announcement from General Motors, really kind of the first U.S. automaker to make the pledge that they will be, changing their entire fleet, eliminating really the production of gas-powered vehicles by 2035. And they're going to use, carbon offsets to pledge to get to zero emissions. So it's a very important, step, I think, for them. Ford made an announcement to be all electric in Europe by 2030. Now that's only 5% of the automotive share in Europe, but still a significant pledge by Ford overseas. And then some other ones here. These are all from Barron's.com, publication from November last year, but Toyota wants to generate half of its sales from EVs by 2025. And then Volkswagen is planning to spend about $85 billion over the next 5 years on a vehicle electrification. They want to have 20 to 25% of their total sales from battery electric vehicles by 2030. Honda looking at electrifying 2/3 of its global auto sales by 2030. And then I mentioned Toyota already on there, so I won't mention that again. But then, if you look at the data in 2018, really only 3 brands other than Tesla and Smart had EV percentages greater than 5% of their US sales. So Fiat, BMW, and Porsche, you see all of them there in terms of the percentage that were EV sales in the United States. Tesla obviously is 100%. Smart's near, I think, 90+% of their cars. So this is a huge change, coming. I think that's the key point of these 2 slides, is that, dates of 2025, 2030 are not too far down the road. But if you look at where we're starting from, this is really an upheaval of the situation. And it gets to one of the questions, I think, near the end of the slide deck that we'll revisit. It's a similar trend that we saw on LED light bulbs in a way. So what's the state of Michigan doing? So in October of this last year, Governor Whitmer announced the formation of the Michigan Council on Future Mobility and Electrification, with really 6 main targeted strategies within that group to increase mobility investment in Michigan, to expand Michigan's smart infrastructure, to encourage more mobility entrepreneur startups, to further enable Michigan's mobility workforce, to accelerate electric vehicle adoption, and to bolster the Michigan's mobility manufacturing core. So leveraging on this investment that's going to be made in the state and worldwide to try to make sure that we could be a presence for manufacturing some of these technologies. One of the things specifically that was done in terms of electrification of vehicles is there was this grant, $1.7 million, which was provided to build out 76 fast chargers. So these are these large DC fast chargers. I think they're about $70,000 a piece, 36 stations throughout Michigan. Pretty bold statement made by the chief mobility officer. This doesn't really fit some of the projections that are out there, with exception of maybe California. But the projection here from Trevor Paul, who's the chief mobility officer, is that EVs are expected to represent 33% of new vehicle sales in 2025 and 51% in 2030. Again, if you look at the grid in Michigan here, the chart on the right might be a little bit difficult to see, but those are all of the major highway corridors. One of the key things in the state here is to try to alleviate range anxiety associated with battery vehicles. And so they're looking at these fast charging stations being put in strategically. Number 57, which is the closest to Holland, was actually the primary location was closer to Saugatuck, because it's before the split off between 196 going to Grand Rapids and the US 31 corridor going straight north. And so that's why that spot was identified there. And this here is the Electrify America that Jeff was referring to. They're looking at ultra-fast EV charging station installations at Meyer locations. There were 8 Meyer locations that were also picked as part of this grant money that was put out.
Dave?
Yes.
Let's say there's an environmental organization in town that happens to own 8 acres of land at the point of bullet point number 57. Would said organization be able to put in a charging station there?
Yeah, if the right infrastructure is there to support it, Travis, I think that would be the key thing to investigate, is what's the availability of that. And if, you know, because that's one of the things the state is looking at getting feedback on, is where the electrical infrastructure is to support these charge stations. But yes, certainly.
You get, Dave, do you guys have any, so if I'm, you know, if I own a gas station, I'm not in love with all of this if I'm thinking about the year 2040. Is there, do you guys like, you know, but they got good locations for cars, right? Like, you know, that's sort of their business. Do you guys talk at the BPW board or wherever level about like going to the folks at Quality and doing like a special partnership and being like, hey, let's get ahead of this. You already got your cafes you're building. You need 15, 20 minutes to charge. Like, let's get in front of this and work together.
Yeah, and I think the key there is that 15 to 20 minutes. You know, and I think that's the thing, that the end users have to see some sort of ability to create a business case for a end customer usage that will satisfy their time that they're going to spend doing that. And I think, you know, Travis's point is you create a little nature center or whatever around, or experience around a place where somebody can charge, then it gives them something to do for that 10 to 15, you know, or 15 to 20 minute period of time. You know, right now our convenience stores, it doesn't take that long to get a coffee and pick up a Twinkie and leave, you know? So, I mean, you know, that's the key question, is how will these businesses evolve to create the 20, maybe even half hour experience sort of situation that really attracts that. I don't want to encourage this. I know that Stowe, Vermont has a fast charger outside their microbrew. But again, that's maybe not the best use of your time for 15 to 20 minutes. But you know, it's that kind of situation though, where you can create something that doesn't feel like a burden, but really feels like a natural extension of your day, and just an experience that you can do, I think, are the best opportunities there. And we have had some conversations about that.
Do you know Jim Saber at all from Next Energy over in Detroit?
I don't, Brian.
They basically like get hired to do all sorts of like future leaning thinking energy related projects. And he's on the board of the EIBC that I'm on the board of. And we were talking and I was like, what's going on with like chargers? And this is like a year ago. And he was like, he's just saying, to your point, like typical gas stations, what's ironic is most of the money they make is actually when people come in and buy candy and all of that kind of stuff. Like that's actually what they want, but
Yep.
they're not actually set up to have lots of people hanging around.
Right.
He goes, and so you know, to make the capital investment to reimagine their entire experience, they're waiting for EV adoption to go up. But then all the rest of the data that I've read, most people go, well, yeah, when the infrastructure is there and I'll be able to charge it at different places and take my trips, then I'll buy the EV. And so it's like everybody's just staring at each other,
It's a chicken
looking
and egg.
like
Yeah.
who moves
Yeah.
first. So the BPW will just move first.
Boyd, how long does it take to get froyo in a cup?
Exactly. Exactly.
I will jump in. I will jump in there, and I think Dave's going to talk about Ford Mobility here in a second too.
Sure.
But I will just say, Boyd, downtown Holland is in what's called a smart zone, and one of the things that I'm definitely teeing up, and I don't control the smart zone. In fact, I'm not even a voting member on it. But we're very interested in suggesting that the smart zone use some of the captured money that they have, and that potentially a smart charger or two in the greater downtown footprint would provide people with opportunity to maybe buy, I don't know, froyo.
Yeah, I know tomorrow in the DDA agenda, Matt will be giving his latest update on downtown beautification, and it's something I really wanted to talk about. How that's being thought about if we're going underground and doing something with electrical, and I think that'd be interesting to also see, if we can get some data together and how merchants are feeling and stuff too.
Yeah, so there's
an example was great, right? I mean, that was really interesting when Dave said that a minute. So I'm not sure that the idea of upcharging for longer tenure downtown, coincides well with what Target can teach us about $1 per minute extra time spent down there.
Right. I think the balance there obviously is people using it because they do unrelated business, like not shopping, but they're, as opposed to people that are actually down there for shopping purposes.
Right, because we have residents and offices, so it's a little different than Target. Yeah.
Yeah.
What we do know now is that a lot of the sites that we have are not used by predominantly by visitors. It's used by people that probably live in town and go and just park their car there and then get a ride back later to pick it up, which I don't think is the type of use that you're interested in, Boyd, or that we want to put public infrastructure to support that necessarily. So again, I think this is just a quickly moving field, and I think that's where the Ford Mobility that Dave's building to kind of falls in place.
Yeah, and so here's a couple of charts, back to the quote from the mobility officer at the state level, is that if you look at the California graph on the right, they're looking at the percentage of EV sales, at 2025, close to 30%. It was forecasted at 33% by the mobility officer. Now, this is a little bit old. This is 2018, so maybe there are some new feelings about it. If you look at the U.S. as a whole, we weren't really getting anywhere close to California experience in these graphs. So it'll be interesting to see what really starts to emerge over the, the next few years in terms of, are we getting closer to the California graph? Or are we staying on this trend line that's more related to the one on the left? Both do see significant growth over a period of time, but it obviously a lot slower in the rest of the U.S. than in California.
Dave, before you get into the Ford Mobility proposal, is that pretty much what's next?
I got one more thing before that, but then
Great. Go for it.
All right. So that kind of is where we are on EV incentivizing and the EV status in the community as it relates to electrification. Another action that we had was to develop our own policy. I think was also mentioned in public comment. You know, the BPW and the city could do more in terms of electrifying their vehicle fleet and kind of leading. That's exactly why we put this strategy in place, was to kind of walk the talk. And so over the last couple of years here, our staff's been working on a policy that was presented to the board and to the city council for adoption on purchases of new vehicles, but it was expanded beyond purchases of vehicles to also include maintenance equipment, because they can be relatively high users and inefficient users of gasoline, and also have other emissions, that are harmful. And so we've adopted this policy on not just vehicles, but also on maintenance equipment. And that was put in place this past year. And so some particulars about that is that it applies to the city of Holland and to the BPW operations. It prioritizes electrification first, but then also looking at hybrid electrification as an alternative to that. If battery only is not really suitable for the mission or potentially not available yet. And then beyond that, it's low emission fuel. So there's kind of a hierarchy to it. Requires really the purchase of battery powered stationary and portable equipment if functionally equivalent to the gasoline powered. And then any exemptions that you would do from that would require that either one of two things. One, it's not supportable over a life cycle cost analysis, or it's more than 15% above the cost up front of the normal gas powered alternative. And again, that's how the policy was adopted. Already made some purchases. Tesla vehicle was purchased for the city public safety operations this last year, and not yet under receipt yet, but vehicle on the right is a hybrid bucket truck. And so while it is still diesel powered for its transmission down the road, it does not have to idle. That's one of the things that some of our larger trucks would have to do today to run all the auxiliary power equipment. And idling is a very inefficient use of gas and a high emitter. And so this would get you to a place where you could then shut off the vehicle and just use the battery auxiliary for all of your articulation. And also it's a good mechanism for being able to charge up and use other portable equipment on the site. So we have one of those on order for our smaller buckets, and we're looking at the larger bucket technology as we get to our next purchase there.
Cool.
And then the last one, as we were building towards, is the forward mobility. This really stems out of a tactical action that really wanted to look at our infrastructure as a whole and be prepared for that next type of vehicle coming down the road, whether it's autonomous or electric vehicles in general. And so this was a much bigger group. There's a long list of people inside and outside the organizations that are involved in this group. I see a familiar face on there by Boyd Feltman, actually, as well. And some of the work that this group has done has been kind of looking at the overall infrastructure pieces. As that journey went along, we had a very key individual on our steering committee, Jim Stelter, who happened to be friends with Jim Hackett, who at the time was CEO of Ford Motor Company. Jim and Jim got together and made available an opportunity for us to go visit Ford, because Ford had launched a new division of their work focused on mobility solutions for communities. And so recognizing that the future is really kind of around this bigger mobility question, Ford is trying to position itself there. We did spend time with them exploring kind of the work that they're doing. They've done a lot of master planning and mobility modeling development for the city of Ann Arbor, for example, and focused on things like how to get people around easier in that last mile, how to allow for mass transit to really support kind of last mile solutions as well. And so what we received from Ford in that instruction was maybe an opportunity to step back and think about the mobility picture a little bit larger scale. And it's kind of like our community plan focused on, to begin with, if you think about our loading order, it's really about not using energy if you don't need to. So how can you wring out the inefficiencies in a system before you're worried about the fuel source that actually goes into that system? And mobility is sort of the same way. If we step back and sort of strategize around mobility in our community, we might be able to lessen the amount of vehicle miles traveled in the first place. Then that would help in the whole electrification issue or other fuel issue. So what we have in place right now is a proposal. We haven't acted on it partly because of COVID. But that would launch a comprehensive stakeholder process to really build some foundational knowledge about mobility industry, but also to create alignment around shared values and understanding how mobility can support Holland as a community of choice. So how can it really sort of create a better situation for Holland to be attractive? Remember, this community plan too is about making sure that we're attractive to business and improving quality of life in our community as well. So looking at that and articulating a clear framework for mobility infrastructure that is flexible, but staged within realistic timing, and then consistent with the goals of the community plan and other city planning. So we have this proposal in place. It is a $75,000 engagement, and we have kind of brought that to this group as well as to whether or not we do this as part of this. This is just something you recommend we do. But I think there's some other central questions as well that we get to the end of this that I wanted to kind of pose to this group to be a conversation starter and to also be available to answer any questions that you have. But I think one thing we do is step back. One thing I didn't point out is when we look at our footprint in our community, this is a relatively small portion of the carbon portfolio or carbon footprint calculation. So one of the key questions here, I think, is to what extent is transportation and mobility a priority for the community plan? Our energy policy and climate central to the mobility question, or are other factors such as economic development and smart infrastructure as much or more related? Is this an issue? Come back to the issue of LED light bulbs. One of the things we found, and we incentivized LED light bulbs for a long time, we really kind of backed away from that a lot. One, because the price point came down significantly, but two, they were coming anyway. It was replacing the incandescent light bulb. So do we feel a need to incentivize things that are coming anyway? Is this a priority for us from that standpoint? To what aspect is mobility? What aspect of mobility is most key to progress on the community plan? And what strategies should be explored? And what does the city or BPW control or influence in this conversation? Just a few questions I put out there, I think, at the end, just to kind of spur some conversation on this. But again, happy to answer any questions on the things that I have covered to date or to our time so far.
These are great questions. PJ, what do you got for us? I see
you. If I could just, Dave, earlier you pointed out that there was a delta between ICE cars and electric vehicles of about 50 CO2 per 100 miles. And of course, we know that part of our goal as a group is to make recommendations about initiatives and goals. Have we done I guess it would be relatively quick algebra of total miles per capita, traveled by vehicles in our relevant area?
Yes,
and,
yes.
And quickly we could probably come up with series of like sensitivity analysis, say, okay, if we get such and such number of EVs, it equates to this reduction per capita of CO2. And, almost show it in table form and quickly illuminate how much or how little impact this may have. And, my own opinion would be, even if that seemed like a relatively low number, this is really an exciting area. And it's an area that I think we could generate a lot of community enthusiasm. It's an area that's highly recognized and several industries are already working towards. I think this might have some potential for us.
Thank you. To answer your question specifically, yes, and recall that Andrew's calculation is based upon an emission factor times the quantity of usage. And in the case of transportation, it's vehicle miles traveled. So we have that, it's estimated data, but we have that data that's the basis of our portfolio, or our footprint rather, calculation. And so we can give you an adoption percentage and what that eliminates in terms of that factor to drive at a number. I think that's something we could come up with fairly easily. So I'll take that as a go-do to try to get something back to this group on that.
I mean, and again, you could reduce that to actual numbers of vehicles, actual
Yes.
numbers of e-vehicles in Holland that we project we would need. And if we're thinking about all these incentives, maybe that would help us select incentives that might be tailored more towards effectiveness for Holland.
Great, PJ, thanks. Other questions or responses to Dave's questions, which are really good questions?
Really good
Okay.
questions.
Go ahead, Nikki.
Oh, I agree with PJ. And electrification of vehicles may come anyhow. If we're going to continue to be a leader, we should run with it. It's a very obvious type of thing. We all own homes, which we should retrofit to be energy efficient. And so many of us own cars, and it's obvious, and it's a good marketing kind of thing. And if it's a chicken and egg kind of thing, then we'll push it forward. And maybe it's only an interim thing. Maybe in 15, 20 years, everything will be electrified, but we will, and we can pull away from that. But right now, I think it's something we need to do strongly.
This is Tim. Just a couple of comments. Somebody brought it up relative to there's going to be a DDA meeting or something like that tomorrow, which jogged my memory in thinking that, Keith, you might have the data as far as what percent of our local GDP is driven by tourism, or those parts of tourism, whether it be in lodging and restaurants, shopping, etc. But one of the things that I'm back of my mind is, are we tourist friendly from the standpoint that, gee, I live someplace else, I want to go to Holland to do something, whether it's go to the lake, go downtown, etc. But I only drive an electric car. Now, just thinking of if somebody like that is coming to our community, how are we prepared as a community, whether in the public sector, private sector, etc., to be able to be welcoming for people where they go, oh, I'm going to Holland because I can plug in my car there, and they're going to pay for it, but at least they can plug it in. That was point one. Point two, Dave Coster, our local GDP is over 30% manufacturing. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's right. I mean,
Okay.
I take a look at the data again, but I think that's about right.
Yeah, I think it's in the low 30 percentile. We are highly unusual as a community in having that concentration of manufacturing, and it's diverse. It's not all office furniture, and it's not all automotive, and it's not all food. It's a mixture of many different industries. The reason I bring that up is all of them use trucks, whether they're own or they have inbound raw materials and outbound finished products, or looking at all of the building that all of us are seeing going on, both in the city of Holland and in our surrounding townships, and the number of construction vehicles of various types, and the majority of them are diesel powered at the present time. So one of the areas that I'd look at and I think our footprint is a little over 12% in the transportation sector. Is that correct, Dave? On the carbon?
Yeah, it's about 11 or 12, I think.
Yeah, okay. But a good part of that has got to be relative to commercial transportation. And are there things we should be looking at, or not only looking at, but making recommendations to incentivize organizations above and beyond where we are today to move over move towards electrified vehicles. Because, and then that does beg the question, are they coming anyways? or do we do something to at least get them started in moving that direction, where it will ultimately be all alternative vehicles? I'll stop there.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Tim. Keith, I see a hand up.
Yeah, just a few things too. This is great conversation. I think exactly what we were looking for. One, I think Joe Sikma is going to be up in a little bit, and I was just going through what he sent out earlier. So, for example, when you talk, Tim, in your background, right, you talk GDP, and a little bit in our system, right, the way we measure it is because GDP isn't the way we monetize. Indirectly, obviously, it impacts us, but for tax base, it's more percentage of taxable value.
Sure.
So that's really more the data that we have available to us. The other thing I'd like to remind to everyone, it's not that we can't push, and investigate some of these types of things, but certainly as we look at incentives, we absolutely have some limits as to what we can incent and how we can incent it, and even if it's legally viable. So for example, you'll see that right now we can incent the installation of chargers, but we can certainly investigate, and I think that's kind of one of those Joe things too, where we look at other examples out there, but I'm not exactly sure how we would convert using public funds in this sense to incent people's purchase of an EV, for example, directly the vehicle.
No, I don't think it's.
So that's, those are the challenges, right? Like
Sure.
we can see all this and yet just, remember we can do what we're legally authorized to do.
Right.
I think your way of getting at that is being more aggressive on infrastructure. Like that's like you create it, you make it easier for people to use EVs in town, is my sense. But I see a hand up from Scott, or he's giving me a high five. He's probably both.
Yeah.
I think as we talk about this, it's great when we look at the, I'm excited about it too. But what I will say is it is a transition, and there are people that will fall between the cracks. And many of you have been arguing for those people that will fall between the cracks for a number of other reasons. But with electric vehicles, they're very, very, very expensive at the current price point that they're being built and being sold to. So there are only going to be a handful of people that can really afford that. And it's going to, hopefully over time, that price point will drop. But they're still very expensive vehicles to purchase, and then to have those charging stations at, let's say, their apartment complexes or their apartments or something of that nature. We just have to be understanding that it's exciting news and we want to move forward, but we also have to understand there will be people that will fall between the cracks that we have to be aware of.
Yep, valid point.
And another point we should think about too is more mass transportation, and the point that was brought up end of that last mile kind of aspect. After you get out of your car. I know Zeeland has electric school buses now. So there's, lots of different areas. These are just the beginnings of our discussion, I think.
I should have mentioned a couple other things. I failed to do that. They weren't in my slide deck. The Zeeland BPW should say, supported some charging stations, Zeeland schools, through the Volkswagen settlement for their missteps there. They had some grant money available to support bus conversion. So they had a program there. They took advantage of that. Also on the MAX here in our area, there are 3 new buses that are coming in that'll be electric buses within the MAX system as well. So we do have some progress happening in our mass transit.
Sure.
I think it's one of the reasons why you may be picking up a little bit from Dave and I, where the mobility proposal we think kind of belongs in a larger conversation with more partners, because as that last bullet suggests, Max maybe we have influence in that conversation, but that is not a city or a BPW entity.
Right.
Mhm.
Boyd, question you have?
Yeah, no, just the final thoughts on this section is, it feels, yes, they're coming, like LED, they're coming anyway, but then the comparison stops there. I mean, the infrastructure to move over to LED was no comparison, right? I mean, little consumer education, get them on the shelves, get the price point down. And there was some financial incentives for folks to help get the initial price point down to get them to swap out, right? This just feels like, from a strategy standpoint, absolute tactical team efforts ongoing for years, to monitor infrastructure, right? In each sector, residential, very different than commercial, very different than industrial. So I struggle with what more I would need to know as a part of this committee to know that we can make some important statements about these changes in the last 3 months alone. So much has changed compared to just last September when we first started convening, given what the manufacturers have said and how quickly administrations have changed, federal, state levels. Things just seem like they're really accelerating here. So the worry for me is more about the tactical side of the infrastructure and communities being more prepared. And I do think a few folks have been alluding to this. There are winners at the community level for those who are possibly more prepared, faster. And Brian brought that up too. There's a real opportunity to drive and push and lead here as quickly as we can, whether I think there are business advantages. But from a strategic level, it seems obvious. We can quantify the impact, and get a tactical team on it year after year with a cross-functional group of folks.
Yeah, that to me this is so much bigger than our committee, and it's a relatively small part of our pie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I just don't know if our primary job is to focus on strategies for the next 3 to 5 years and to lift those up. If that's our primary role, this thing is like I envision, like, in the report, us being like, get together with everybody in town and figure this out, right? Like, I mean, it's like, I think the actual not more interesting, but one of the things that I was going to bring up, when you referenced the GM announcement, Dave, and I know this from my work, that one of the interesting indirect things as it relates to that announcement is the entire supply chain has to get really serious about what they're doing on their sustainability and environmental plans. Because when GM says we're going to be X, net zero emissions, they are talking about the whole supply chain in terms of their goals. And so it's actually not about transportation in terms of mobility and people moving around. GM's announcement and the other big autos announcements on these goals is actually going to put a bunch of pressure on our manufacturers to be more efficient, to do renewable, to buy RECs, to buy carbon offsets. Like, that is actually, like, as it relates to the CEP and our metric tons, it's actually going to impact the built environment way more relative to our pie than it is for, like, cars driving around. Because, I mean, I can give you lots of very real examples of manufacturers in town that are, like, literally, like, trying to figure out, because they're getting requests now from their, GM and others, Volvo. I mean, it's a global thing. They're all basically like, hey, when you submit your price or your product information, also X, Y, and Z, like, show us your CDP scorecard, show us blah, blah, blah. I mean, and a lot of these companies they don't really know where to go or what to do. So that's the other tailwind, as it were, tied to these announcements beyond the cars themselves.
And as Dave said, it's an upheaval. I mean, everywhere. It's got repercussions all down the line.
Yeah. So
But those are
anyways.
great comments, and no, yeah, I think Brian, it's well put there that that indirect effect. We have a very significant amount of manufacturing base that's supporting the suppliers that are ultimately going to be building these EVs, and they're going to have certain supply chain requirements as well. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. Jeff, I see.
Yeah, so I guess I mean, kind of similar to what has been said already, but I think some of these announcements, one, I think like electric vehicles, the big difference between that and a lot of the other things that we're talking about is it's a tangible thing that is different than what people are using before, right? When we're talking about greening the electric portfolio, you turn on your lights and they turn on exactly the same as what they did before. When you're driving your electric car, even though it's a smaller piece of the total pie in Holland, I think it's like 25% nationally. So it's a bigger pie elsewhere, but we're a little bit different. But it's the real tangible thing that's like, it works different and it feels different, and you can tell instantly that, oh, this is an electric car. So I think there's just an education component of it that's very different than a lot of the other things that we're talking about. That makes it maybe a more valuable lever than just the 12%, right? You get an electric car, you like track your energy use more, and you realize like, you're kind of more, and I guess some of that is because at this stage, at least, you're an early adopter and you're doing it, for some of these other reasons on top of it. But I think it's a bigger piece of the story than 12% because of the visibility and how clearly different it is than anything else that really we're talking about.
I know a couple people who have elected renewable energy rates since they got an EV, as opposed to not having an EV.
Yeah.
So it helped change behavior on that.
Yep. I'm sure that's the case. And I guess the other component of that, I do think transportation is way bigger than anything that we're going to be able to do in this, like it's a bigger issue than just the CEP, I think. Just for like the design of the city and, how I think like it's, talking about public transportation and all of that thing, I think is bigger than what our specific slice of what we're looking at is. But I do think there's an outsized impact on electric vehicle adoption, whether it's something like if the city, all of a sudden, all of the city vehicles were electric, that says something and brings attention and notice to the community's goals in a much different way than we bought a 12 megawatts of solar that's kind of in the middle of the state. Like the 12 megawatts of solar may actually have a bigger impact, but it doesn't have the same community impact in just right? It's like a driving around billboard, like we're committed to this, and this is something that you should be thinking about as well. So I think I guess I see that at 12%, it's not a huge part of the carbon in this community. But I think it plays a relatively large role in what we're trying to do, especially from an education standpoint.
It's tangible.
Yeah, very visible.
Well put.
Keith, you mentioned something earlier. It's similar to the city's policy about procuring electric vehicles, in the future, and whether they're work vehicles or whether they're, detectives vehicles. You brought up earlier the possibility for the city to get into investing in some infrastructure as well to help accelerate. So I think things like that could go in the strategic plan. Just talk about the city investing where opportunities present themselves in the charging infrastructure, for example.
Yeah, because everything's going to happen. Upheaval was a great word that I heard some of you said, right? Because it's like, okay, how do you plan in a world that's totally being upheaved, in the middle of upheaval? You don't, like we all heard you don't want to be on bleeding edges. You want to be on leading edges, and that's all going to evolve a lot in the coming times. So, I think one of the things that Dave and I are looking for, and we didn't even coordinate this, but like I think we're kind of thinking, here's the presentation on transportation, barring, is there anything else that people want to hear in an upcoming meeting where it's like, do you need to hear another presentation on transportation? Or kind of like I've heard a little bit already, it's like, hey, like this is going to be really hard to figure out. And there's going to be a lot of different partners that need to be part of it. So kind of what you were already investigating is probably the way you want to go. And that's like the strategic level that you want to do. It'd be helpful, I think, for Dave and I to know, like, are you looking for something else, or do you almost have what you need?
I'm curious to hear Jeff's thoughts, because you sounded the most like there was more to this than otherwise.
Yeah, I guess I think generally I see the direction, like I generally think it seems good. Yeah, I don't know. I do think it's a whole city and community wide thing. So I'm not sure how, like, it's bigger than a $300 credit for a charge station in your home.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like that program is good and I think it should continue, but it's a much bigger and messier conversation than anything like that. So I'm not sure exactly how best for this group to really interface with that bigger conversation.
Maybe we could think of like some strongly worded language around, like the appropriate people, whoever they are, I don't even know, like get together, like Lakeshore Advantage and the city and the BPW and the chamber, and the Visitors Bureau get together, and like we highly recommend they look at the Ford mobility proposal, and or whatever, like I don't know, but it just seems like I don't know what I don't feel like we in and of ourselves could do a lot more than just like highly encourage all the appropriate people to talk about it for real. I don't know. Is that what you're saying, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm saying. I mean, this is kind of a silly example, but when I bought my electric car, I had to go to the dealership and say, yes, I want that car. And they tried to sell me a different car. And I said, no, that's the car I want. And they didn't have any idea about any of it. Like I had to sell myself the car. The dealership had no idea about, it was a plug-in hybrid and they didn't even know that it like, oh, this one plugs in. I'm like, yes, that's the whole.
It's terrible.
So I think, right. But obviously like educating dealerships and stuff, I think that is outside of our purview. I mean, maybe it's not, maybe that's part of the broader education in the community, but there are just so many moving parts to this. Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the selling points is that there's not as many moving parts in an electric vehicle,
sure.
right? I mean, you're, yeah.
That may come into our business part of this when we work with the businesses in the community. And I would say with the last question on that slide, how much can BPW in the city, how much control or influence can they have on it? As much as we can. We can control our own vehicles as an advertisement to the community, that outsized influence, and then work with the businesses. If you have.
Yeah, and I think that's where Dave and I are talking, right? We want to walk the walk, but I'll just be blunt, right? I don't think Dave and I want to get an assignment that we're supposed to accomplish something in an area outside of what we can control.
Correct.
Right? So
you're right up to the edge.
So that's probably not something that Dave and I are really, now gathering people together and getting people at the table and those types of things, right?
You know, Keith, I think if I can add something to that, I think the responsibility of the group and of the city, if they want to accept this responsibility, is to be advocates for something. And so if you build this into your plan as you want to advocate for more of it, and as a city, you help advocate for it, because you have groups like mine. I mean, we literally have, just the other day, 4 charging stations are delivered and we're waiting for them to be installed here at the ODC, because we have one right now and there's like a line of cars going out the driveway trying to get hooked up to it every day. And we have people driving from Chicago to this area and beyond, and they're looking for places to charge. And they literally come in and tell us the same person charges every time he drives through town. So like, we see that we need to do it, but I think from a leadership standpoint and from the role of this plan could be that you can accomplish something by merely advocating for it. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and stick, charging stations all around town, and that's your responsibility. No, it can be my responsibility to put in a charging station. It could be Boyd's as a business owner, or PJ's as a business owner, or Hope College, or whoever. You don't have to own that, but as a leader, you should be advocating for it. And I think that's how that fits into this plan.
And just to be clear, I totally agree with that, Travis. And I see Ted even plugged in something underneath there. Right? and Jeff is exactly right. This is about it's kind of like targeted education as much as anything else. So it kind of goes with that other lever. I hope people have the perspective that if you hear from Travis or from Dave and myself and council and the BPW board about adopting, our policies, we are absolutely advocates for it, and we're doing it. Our tests, I don't think we've ever gotten as many media calls as we did when we bought the Tesla for the Detective Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I'm absolutely agreeing with you, Travis, and I think we will continue to be and get better at it, but we are leaders and advocates.
And I think that the other piece is just like, we're really focused on like electric vehicles, which is fine. But like, if we think about like carbon reductions and mobility, like it's Tim's point around like the truck fleet and how walkable the city is, or how much we can ride bikes places and thoroughfares. Like, these are things that are just way, way beyond this group here in terms of like having ideas and the ability to make influence and all of that kind of stuff, right? Like my office is in Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids has got some deal with some electric scooter startup, and there's like 15 electric scooters right out in front of my office, and you could go and like, there's an app and you can just buzz around town, and it's really cool, right? Like, so stuff like that is interesting, but like, there's so many other stakeholders that need to be involved in those kinds of conversations that I just think it's just like, yeah, we want to cheer it on, but I don't think that we're really in a spot to be like reinventing anything outside of like, cheering on the whole effort and being advocates. So I guess
and if you have the vision, all that will follow.
I do want to throw a wrench in when we write the plan. I hear advocate, educate, but there's a third word that this one's a little more controversial. It might push a task force a little more, but accommodate. I do think there's a place for city right now and for the coming years to work on accommodation. And so advocacy, education, and accommodation. I think that third one drives more tangible investment and work, probably, and more thought from more detailed thinking.
PJ, I saw a hand.
Yeah.
Thanks, Boyd.
From my viewpoint, just in this conversation alone, I think we have plenty that we could very practically come up with a set of 3 to 5 year goals and a handful of strategic initiative recommendations for each one of them. I didn't understand our task as having to solve all these problems, but our task is to make thoughtful recommendations. And I totally follow. I really like the arguments about the proportions of these different things. But I think transportation is a major, obviously a major lever here. And I think that our city council would probably question us vigorously if we didn't have recommendations specifically towards transportation.
I think it'll be, it'll be interesting whether those are priority over other ones. I think is sort of the question. I don't think we're lacking on like good ideas. I just think how, and we'll get into this down the road when we write the report. Like,
and Brian, I have to admit, I'm in the process of reading the Bill Gates book. And so everything I'm listening to, I'm thinking Bill Gates says this. And so I certainly think, and he does speak towards transportation as being a very important piece of it. Yeah. And again, I'm very encouraged by the opportunity that this team has to come up with some things that I think the council would be greatly appreciative of us. Again, in my mind, all they're asking for are 3 to 5 year recommendations. We don't have to solve the whole problem, but we do have to come up with something that council can consider for action.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as we embark on the next couple of weeks and we circle back and on this topic to have final thoughts, I think that the filter that I'll be walking away with is, as we review what Dave and the team are currently working on, are those our 3 to 5 year recommendations, or do we think that something different or above what they're currently what's in motion? I think that's in 2 weeks and beyond, but in 2 weeks when we circle back, those would be the good ideas I think we can bring to light is like, hey, let's do something above what you currently have in the matrix.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, the part that's lacking in the current matrix, I think the education and advocacy is not where I think it could be for the next 3 to 5 years. Because I think this is the time frame that there is less, this is a good time window for those things. Because 10 years from now, it might be like LEDs where most everybody has them, or 50% of new car sales or something. I don't know I don't think it's going to be that in 10 years either. But
it will.
I think we're going to be surprised.
You'll think of 50% in 10 years in Michigan?
GM, you're going to have GM, you're going to have the reason why people didn't have adoption before is because all you could buy is like a Tesla or a weird.
No, I mean, I agree with that. But
you're going to be able to buy a Suburban, a LeSabre. You're going to get they're going to have the whole fleet. I'm serious. Adoption's going to go nuts.
I'm fairly well versed in this, but the battery technology in 10 years is not, well, I don't know. There's some solid state battery, which maybe.
It'll be something different than what there is today.
Yes. But they're charge times and stuff are still going to be somewhat of an issue in 10 years. I think in 20 years, it's a totally different story, but.
Well, in 20 years, the cars will drive themselves.
They will.
And charge themselves.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere in between, kind of Jeff is right and Brian is right, but Scott's also right there too, as far as what's the adoption going to be?
Yeah.
I think we often think of, well, it's just the new cars that people are buying off the lot. And if you look at the numbers of vehicles of people that people own, we're still going to have a lot of people that, drive a 10 or a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old car.
A 20-year-old, right.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's just the recognition too of it's going to take time for all of this to fully integrate and adopt, which kind of introduces a whole nother level, as Scott appropriately brought up, of how that makes it more complicated too.
Well, that's where the BPW and the city buy a fleet of EVs. We partner with Lyft and have 50 of them driving people around and underworked, folks that are having a tough time, they can ride around for free in the electric vehicle.
Max public transportation sounds like a wonderful.
Like I said, we don't have all the right stakeholders in this meeting. All right.
I'll get parked at the BPW.
Just do Holland Board of Public Works rental, electric rental company, right? We just rent out.
Hey,
I think the city manager's office needs to manage that. I don't know why we'd put that on anybody else.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're right.
You guys create a 9-day work week too?
Yeah. Well, that's not new.
It's only 8 right now, Tim.
You're just not working hard enough, Keith.
PJ, did I see another question?
Dubs.
PJ, go ahead, PJ.
Brian, one more, and this is on the potential future for e-vehicle purchases. Of course, my company supplies the automotive industry, so we're keenly interested in, the 17 million light vehicle units per year, that number and what makes up that number. And what we've come to understand, particularly over the past few years, is that when you look at that big number, the number of total purchases, there are a relatively small number of people, consumers in the United States, who purchase in an ordinary large number of cars. So even though very true that there's going to be a lot of people who still can't do the price point of e-vehicles, there still is a very significant demand coming to support this initiative. And so, again, I would, I would recommend we go long on this strategy and make this part of our recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We're
we ate up a lot of that time, didn't we? So
yeah, we did.
That was good.
It's good discussion. Joe's done some nice work too. I want to make sure that, as I know you probably have to leave, but we want to make sure Joe has a chance to check in with you. So
I don't think we've ever finished at 5. So go ahead, Joe.
All right. I've just got 2 quick updates this week, and I think it'll just be a homework assignment for the next gathering. Hopefully this team received an email this morning with a live copy of the data I've been working on. I will share that right now. There's also a static version 2 in the meeting notes for the general public to take a peek at as well. But really just giving you a chance to dive in and look at this data that I've been pulling up, so you can squint and turn your heads on your own time and see the data if you want to. But 2 updates for this week, just to keep in mind. This right column here is starting to fill in with these circles. But the way those are read is a little bit different than the first 2. So these first 2 on the left, people and profit, the colors indicate how close the city is to the city of Holland. So green would be very close, yellow is somewhat, and red is not. In this orange column for planet, it's how well they're performing in terms of overall performance for sustainability. So green is a high performer that's performing beyond Holland. Yellow is kind of on course or in the same field as us, and then red is behind us in terms of performance for that grouping. You'll see some are in gray. Those are ones I've not gotten to yet. And then other places, it's just they're not comparable. So keep that in mind as you look at this data.
Can you give us a legend just on the table itself? Just throw in a legend so we always keep this. I know I will mess that up.
Yep, I'll toss it in there. That's a great suggestion.
Okay.
Yep, that's good feedback. Thank you. And then the second thing would just be the cities here I've categorized in their columns by how close they are. So in Michigan, top to bottom, it's by how many green circles they have. So these ones on top are closer, and then in national as well. So the ones on top of the national category here, below this bar, top down, are what's closest to furthest away from us in terms of comparison. So that would lead us to have kind of the front runners starting to shake out here, and that will be the homework assignment. The ones in bold are front runners in terms of they're close to the city of Holland in these key metrics, and then also are high performers on the planet side. So you'll see that Muskegon and Wyandotte are closer than Grand Rapids, but they've not been as progressive in their work in this area, so they're not really worth us diving into for like a holistic look. So the 4 that I've recognized are Grand Rapids and Lansing for Michigan, and then Dubuque, Iowa, and Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So those are kind of the 4 front runners that I'm hoping we can look at over the next 2 weeks, and then confirm next time to be kind of that deep dive holistic look that we take. And then Keith and Dave have been clear too. It's not that those are the only cities we'll look at. We're going to take kind of the key pieces that I found from the other cities in this research and make sure we note those interesting points and things we want to look at as well. But those 4 are kind of the candidates for this deep dive in the next phase.
Well, we've got Joe set up to make calls to those 4 cities. And then Keith and I are going to go visit 4 cities in Europe. So
For the summer?
I wondered where you were going there, Dave, but like, oh, okay.
Joe, are you going to call Allison in Grand Rapids?
Hoping to, yep. I've got connections with all 4 of these so far, so yep.
Okay. If you have any trouble with Allison, let me know. I'm good friends with Allison.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful. Good work,
I
Joe.
just think Joe's done a great job with this. If you've had a chance to kind of open up some of the tabs in the live version, you can see the amazing amount of detail that's gone in there. And this will be a useful tool for us to continue to track going forward. And also hopefully build some relationships with communities that have activities going on too, that we can bring back some of the ideas for the strategies. And so just want to thank Joe for that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Awesome, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Keith, is that the assistant manager position that is approved, right, and has sustainability in its title? Do you picture something like Joe's table getting picked up and owned by that role? Like an
Yeah, so
annual
let me just
update?
take a moment on that structure, because every once in a while this comes up, and so now I can educate. And so we have a full-time assistant city manager position for economic development and sustainability. And right now, the decision that I recommended to council that I think is going to continue in the immediate future is because of the amount of COVID and economic uncertainty. We're not filling that with an actual full-time person, but we've contractually have a relationship with the United Way / Housing Next, where Ryan Kilpatrick is doing that, in particular because he has a huge, wonderful expertise on economic development things. Eventually, though, that position, yes, that will come on full-time. But a cool thing that's happened in the meantime, too, is while we had 2 very good employees historically that had kind of part-time roles in this, Ken Freestone and Aaron Thalenwood, they both, at their own choice, moved on to other opportunities. So what we've done is we've combined that in kind of what I'll call a project manager role full-time. And we have a new person that's starting later this month in March in that role. And I think that's a person that will partner a lot with Joe, right? In kind of being the man on the street role of doing some of the things historically that we've done, but also really, moving initiatives forward. So that was a long way to say, yes, Boyd, I think what Joe's creating here, right, is something that the next iteration of SDT meets, we've got a really good tool that we don't want to lose track of, but whereby Joe does some work for ODC contractually for the city on broad sustainability education. The 2 positions that I just described are waking up every day on behalf of the city and doing direct work. So we're going to take advantage of those opportunities and continue to advocate, educate, and accommodate.
Ooh, you're a quick learner.
Wow. I was asking because, I can picture in our final write-up this, beautiful tool, an analytical summary of what we learned from it, and the strategy to keep it updated annually, keep apprised to best practices, and that it's owned, right? So that's why I was asking.
And I don't know, will we update it annually or not? I think that's a conversation. What I think is those comparable communities that we really kind of say, hey, we want to keep track of.
Yeah.
I think we want to build into those relationships so we can freely steal from other communities that are really doing some really good things, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's actually written up. Yep, I get it.
So kind of along that, like, is there any thought about like reaching out to some, especially, I don't know, the top 10 most comparable communities and saying, here, we built out this really cool tool. Why don't you guys keep your data up to date and we'll keep our data up to date and we can all use this to keep track of each other? Would there be like, is that something that could even happen?
Well, I don't see why not. I mean, there may be some, depending upon what their priorities are that, especially if they haven't done a lot in that planet section, maybe they're going to,
Yeah. So,
I mean, give us a friendly
like,
wave or whatever. I don't know what they're going to do, but they're, I guess we certainly can, those that we're talking about sharing ideas on strategies. Absolutely. I think, we want to commit to maybe using a common set of information, or maybe they even have an idea how they're doing comparisons with communities that we don't have on either the people or profit side that maybe we can learn from.
First 2 weeks would be disputing the colors that they were assigned. That's how it goes. You just got to keep that behind the scenes and say, reach out to you. As soon as you show them a color, it's all over.
As you might suspect, this benchmarking is so hard. I've been working on this for over 20 years in my field, right? And finding comparable communities that do things differently, that have kind of the mix by community.
Yeah.
And then all kinds of other interesting things that get rolled into that. It's much easier to talk about and say, hey, wouldn't that be great if, than actually pulling it off, I guess is partly what I'm saying.
It's a challenge.
I think the nice thing about these comparisons is that, these are actual communities that have similar situations from us too, in terms of wrestling with the role of the private sector and the role of the public sector, the use of public funds and things like that too. So, I mean, I think it'll be a good learning experience when we start digging into the specific programs that are being operated in those different communities as well, to kind of understand, where those limitations are, even on things that Keith was talking about earlier in terms of the use of public funds. So it'll be a really useful tool for us going forward, I think.
Great.
Good.
Dave and Mr. Chair, we got a few things left, but is everyone still good that we still hit some items? I think especially we probably want to give some updates on public engagement.
Yeah, unless you want to highlight any major new attachments on the resources document, I think that we just get to the public engagement before anybody has to peel off.
Yeah, Ann's presentation is there from education. You probably saw that. I mean, there's not a lot new in the resources document other than that at this point.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, let's just touch on the public engagement plan, because I think that's real important to just put us, to get that on record here and that we're thinking about it. So.
Okay. I can take that and kind of organize in an executive summary form, kind of what we're talking about. Dave and I had a conversation with Brian and Travis, which is kind of how we're keeping the rhythm going of, setting agendas and all those types of things. And just a few things for everyone to know. Dave and I have connected with Julie Ornay from the Frost Center at Hope College. And we have another meeting scheduled with her, I think yet later this week. So we're making that connection and making progress. I would generally say there's kind of three kind of categories that we're working on that I think that we're pursuing right now. One is kind of that feedback in a survey more directly from the business community, and then especially at this stage focused on industrial and commercial customers, connected to kind of like the soon that we're going to enter into the conversations here very soon about buildings and also kind of their corporate strategies. So the thought is that we're going to use Frost Center for some input and expertise, but that more than likely will have either a BPW or maybe a Lakeshore Advantage administered survey or surveys.
Mhm.
And they probably won't be the same for like a commercial corridor as it is like the top 10 industrial customers versus maybe a more broadly industrial customers.
Mhm.
And that we try to gather and get that data parallel with some of the conversations that you'll continue to have here in the coming months. So that's kind of one path that we're running on, which we think we can, do that on a quicker path. The second is then we'll have the conversations with Frost Center about having an eventual citizen survey that would be statistically significant, which basically means it's not every citizen would actually get a call from the Frost Center, but they use the methodologies that they have in place where they get representative samples.
Mhm.
And we're thinking that would be less open-ended then, right? Because it would only go out to a representative sampling of our community. And they have great methodologies there where they make sure that they're getting that across economic and diversity, backgrounds. But that would probably be more structured in response to some of the strategies that you guys are all working on. And by the time that we do that survey, it would be more, how would you feel if we pursued X, strategy as it related to these levers? And of course, we would use very, good language and methodologies from the Frost Center where it wouldn't be worded the way that I just worded it, Tim.
Okay.
And so we think that that's very possible and probable. And then the third thing, we really think that in addition to that kind of citizen input, to continue to talk about in kind of time and then schedule more of an open public engagement that would really probably have at least roughly two components. One, kind of that open house where, as we figure out as COVID continues, how can you guys be made available to just get feedback from just anyone and everyone that wants to come in and talk to you? Because I think that's important. And we probably at that point have information where like it's not just broadly on anything, but they'd probably already have kind of the results of your work, because I think that's probably the best type of input, but they'd be available to talk to you about anything. But then the other thing that we're talking about is maybe a particular SDT meeting is set aside only for the purpose where we would have maybe, I don't know, 10, 15-minute presentations from particular sectors and representatives from sectors that would be able to come in and say, hey, we think that you should specifically, look at this strategy over the next 3 to 5 years. And really kind of give some of those sectors a targeted invitation to come in and do that. So that's kind of the discussion that we've had in general on public education. I think we can pull off all of those different elements. So that's what we've been discussing and working on, and certainly open for your feedback and thought, but without other kind of correction or direction. That's what we're pursuing.
Good. Thank you, Keith.
Yeah. Any initial comments on that?
There was one piece there I'm a little confused on. It sounded like we would be individually interfacing with the public based on the overall body of work draft recommendation. Did I misunderstand that?
Not individually like you guys as individuals, but have you guys as a committee kind of, ideally in non-COVID, right? You'd have like an open house type opportunity for people to come in and have dialogue
Sure.
with you as a group.
Not one-on-one. Is that,
Yeah.
okay? I misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
sorry.
Nobody's left hung to dry.
yeah.
Yeah, we have them tacked up on the wall here.
You know, we're pretty used to that, Dave and I, right? And we've got really good examples in this community where you do kind of have those community open houses.
Yep.
Where it's kind of quite often it's like, hey, there's a public presentation, you know, for this amount of time, but then there's kind of unstructured time for people to, you know, not everyone does as well in those larger settings. So then they like to have more, you know, direct conversations. So hopefully we're able to have that some months out, but if not, we're probably going to challenge each other, right, to try to figure out how could we do that in some kind of virtual setting.
Cool.
I like that.
Yeah. Any other comments or
Should cover
questions?
the public engagement.
What's that, Nikki?
That should cover the public engagement, a survey, statistical sample, and then actual public engagement.
Actual, yeah. The public actually does engage.
By the time we get done with this, COVID will be over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Keith said it well, but just to reiterate, and the residential survey, I'll call it residential, but the survey to individuals, the sampling, statistical sampling, that we feel like would be better if they're responding to something specific versus as we're developing a plan, like the groups are, you know, and the businesses are more impacting the plan potentially versus, you know, an individual person. It's a little better for them to respond to something more specific.
Good.
So yeah, cool. All right, well, that gets us to right now.
To 5 o'clock.
What's that?
To 5 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 5
Yeah, that
o'clock.
was 20 minutes ago.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So the 15th next week, we'll get a chance to circle up on transportation, and in particular commentary on, you know, reviewing the existing matrix, 3 to 5 year strategies, and having ideas on like what could be tweaked or different or better or whatever. Though that's the interesting, I think, commentary on transportation.
Mhm.
And then I think, Dave, I don't know if we decided on this or not. Do we pick a part of the building sector or not? Or are we just talking transportation and that's it? And we're not trying to start something else next time?
Well, I think we have a couple of things coming up that are interesting schedule issues coming up. One is to avoid BPW board meetings in April. We have a little bit of a shift in the schedule. Right now, we're planning on March 15 and then March 29.
Mhm.
And then immediately the next week would be April, I think 6. Sorry, April 5. And right now we kind of have a decision to make about whether we do March 29 and April 5, because I can't do April 12. April 12 is a board meeting. We're back in that. So I've got to like shift a week. So we could either, and I know we're going to miss somebody else on March 29, and that's Mr. Van Beek is going to be gone.
Be the best
So, yeah. So what we could do, if there's interest, we could meet next week or in 2 weeks on the 15th, and then we could meet on April 5. And then that would get us kind of back on a 2-week schedule, avoiding the board meetings again.
Instead of the 29th?
You'd skip the 29th then, yeah.
Isn't
So we go
So
from,
it'd be 15th and it'd be 3 weeks rather than 4 weeks. It'd be 3 weeks. Otherwise, in order to miss a board meeting, which is in April, a BPW board meeting, we'd have to do like a back-to-back week, 1 week, then the very next week meet again.
And then that doesn't let Keith off the hook either, right?
No, I've tried to talk to him about where he has got to call in from, because you can virtually, no, he's not going to call in. I'm kidding.
Actually, for 2 things, and now Dave Coster, you just exposed me. Actually, I'm not going to be here either on March 29 or April 5.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
Because it's my first time that I've had a week off and 25th wedding anniversary and a whole bunch of things all together.
Wow.
And I know that nobody's really doing spring break, and yet April 5 is spring break week also.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that sounds like, I mean, I don't know who's got kids in school and that matters, but April 5 is usually a bad week.
Yeah, I mean, I can go ahead. We can continue to meet without Keith on the 29th. I just would, and I know Ann is on the line here, so I don't want to like put her on the spot with it. But the next thing is the built environment, right? So we're talking about our efficiency programs for reduction of usage in our different sectors, and that's immediately right in her wheelhouse as far as our energy waste reduction programs. So we do have a proposed new energy waste reduction program, but we also have our work that we've done in the tactical action teams on the home energy retrofit program to date. Where are we in that? And what have we done with our commercial and institutional buildings? And you know, where are those recommendations sitting? And then there were some other things on our opportunity matrix that we had put out there that I'll tell you, I don't know that our city manager would be real excited about exploring those without him here, because they fall into the category of mandates, which may not be in our realm of possibility, you know, to be able to even do. But there are things in the opportunity matrix, like, are there anything that we can do with our rental program? Because right now, people can't, in their rental program, they can't necessarily influence that easily their ability to save energy because it's the landlord that makes that investment. But if the landlord isn't incentivized because they don't pay the utility bill to do that, are there other things? And one of the concepts in our opportunity matrix, for example, is you know, is there something you can do in your licensing program with them to require certain things, either whether it's visibility on their energy usage in their units, or whether it's actually making improvements. You know, there are a number of things. If you read through that opportunity matrix, I kind of ask you all to kind of go back to that and look at that. You'll see that there are a lot of things in there that are not necessarily the most comfortable topics to discuss, because, you know, you get beyond the ability to have enough carrots, and you got to figure out where the sticks come in. If you're going to do something here locally, if you're going to rely upon state policy, because there is also that going on. The state is working a program right now. They've launched the climate task force to look at getting to carbon neutrality by 2050. You know, maybe there'll be things that will come down that will empower the city that don't currently, the city isn't empowered to do, or maybe there'll be things on a state level. I'm just saying that opportunity matrix has a lot of meat in it, but a lot of that meat is mandate related meat as well. So just, we can start exploring the things that we've done from an incentive standpoint and tee it up. But I almost like Keith to be there if we start getting into the conversation about mandates.
My sense, and Dave, you tell me if this is wrong, is I think next time on the 15th, we meet, we recap transportation, make sure we haven't missed anything, sort of land the plane there for the time being. And then we get an update on the residential stuff that you've been doing and anything that might be currently in motion, like worthy of note. And it's just like, we're not digging into anything too, you know, too much. We're just getting the update. And then if we don't want to get into like the mandate stuff with Keith gone, we could probably on the 29th do an update on the C&I efficiency program. And so sort of do 2 weeks in a row of updates. And then when Keith is back and post spring break, we get back into like, you know, here's new things to be chewing on. I mean, there's going to be a lot to talk about relative to the C&I built environment on ideas around like green revolving fund and stuff like that. I mean, there's going to be a bunch of stuff. So what if we just did updates until spring break, and then afterwards we got into the more deliberation and ongoing deeper education?
Yeah, let me check with my team here. Okay. And you know, because I want to make sure they can support the presentation of it and the development of it, but we'll definitely, I think, take that as a draft plan at this point in terms of the next item, next meetings. And I'll get back to you and Travis here if there has to be a modification to that.
Okay.
It's listening, but her camera isn't on. She's a smart woman.
Keith, what about the legal aspects? Last fall, I think we had a good legal education around how BPW can invest, and that was really helpful to give us running rules so ideas didn't go right out of bounds right away. This feels like one of those two where ideas can just go right out of bounds so fast. For all of us to kind of understand those parameters, maybe it is from just, from you, or do we have, legal come in on record, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think the things that Dave talked about, like there is an element where we've identified some things that people talk about. Wouldn't it be great if, but current legislation, the state says like, that's not an option, right? So I think we can outline some of that. Some of it might get more interesting like on the rental stuff. But I can put some thought into that, Boyd, because I think you're correct, right? You don't want to go too far down with an idea and then kind of have to feel like you have to reel it back, because it's like, hey, it's great that you got excited about that for 10, 15 minutes, but like you really can't do it, right? That's not helpful, I think, is what I hear you say, and I agree with you.
You'll let us talk, and we will.
and then I'll get more and more nervous, and I'll be like, okay, how do I just be the bearer of bad news and throw a wet blanket on this?
And for public, I think, public is attending, and it's nice up front. I think it's nice for it to be recorded and up front in the discussion to have the parameters really well understood and where things get gray versus where they're black and white.
Right. Like we know that building codes, for example, are within the state's purview and the localities have to follow that. You can do things to try to encourage, try to educate, things like that, but you can't mandate going beyond, at least as the code exists today. There may be a new code in the future that gives some flexibility to localities. And if that happens, then there'll be a local choice to be made. But there are other areas too, where some of these things, like right now, there are states passing policies that forbid municipalities from mandating a certain type of fuel hookup. I know the natural gas industry is very scared about electrification. And so there are state laws in many states now that have been recently enacted that prohibit municipalities from mandating electric only sources for new hookups for homes. So, I'm just saying that the state is generally where this stuff gets controlled and governed. But the other side of it is, if you want to make progress, there's only so many carrots to be dangled to where you're not going to get the interest of people anymore. And if you really want to make progress on the behavior side of the usage, it has to kind of tip over to a mandate position after a while, or you're just going to stall.
So, Dave, your plan for the BPW as a manager, you must have some kind of plan already in place for the future, because you see like electrification coming. You've done the new power plant without the CEP or the SDT on you all the time. What would your plan look like? What are you must have some.
Our plan is really twofold, I would say. One is, you'll see that we've increased when we talk about it, we'll be sharing that we're increasing our investment in our energy waste reduction program. We feel that we can, at least in the short run, continue to make inroads towards helping businesses and residents save energy and still be cost effective compared to what they would pay if the utility provided all those needs. So, that there's a cost effectiveness test that limits our ability to what we do on that, but we think we can do more and still be cost effective. So that's part of it. And the second is, just like electric vehicles, we think that there's a financial incentive to the utility to electrification, and it has the environmental benefit that goes along with it as we green our portfolio. But again, our limits have to be rooted in some sort of basis for a return back to the utility. We can't use the utility's funds for things that don't pay back to the utility, or go into the service for the customer, essentially go into something that is a benefit ultimately to the ratepayers. And that's the basic premise of the legal construct that we've talked about in the past. And so, our program designs strategically go in those directions, but have practical limitations in the law. So, that's without the SDT or CP, that's where we're heading. If there are additional things to come in, incentive or mandate, that's not going to be a BPW function. That's going to either be a state mandate, a local mandate if the locality is able to do it, or other use of public funds are going to probably be a local use of public funds outside the BPW, as long as it is statutorily authorized. And so, that's kind of how that construct is going to come down.
Oh, right. Okay, that's good. Dave, check with your team on viability of those presentations, and we'll map that out. But tentatively plan on transportation recap, and we'll start with residential next time, and we'll let you know if that's going to be a wild change. Otherwise, we're going to do the 15th. We're going to do the 29th and have our best meeting ever because Keith won't be there.
You'll accomplish amazing things.
And then we're going to skip 2 weeks to the 19th.
Correct.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, let it be known.
Yeah, by that time you will have had everything and you'll be ready on the 19th of April to really dive into all the stuff you've heard in the training, the background, the updates.
We'll meet in person by then.
Yes, let's hope.
Or outside.
Right. Get your shots.
Yep, get your shots.
Yeah. Cool.
Just let me know when it's available. I'll be there.
Yeah.
We're
burning opportunities or issues or concerns for anyone?
Nope, good for now.
All right.
Sounds like a good plan.
Great. Well, then we'll see you in 2 weeks, everybody. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. And again, we don't say it enough. Thanks for your dedication to all of this. This is a big time commitment. But this is great work, and I think you're doing fantastic work. So thank you. We'll double your paycheck next time.
Gee, thank you.
Maybe like a free Jolly Rancher or something.
Whatever. We'll find some city and BPW swag or something for you.
Oh wow.
Okay. All right. See ya.
Bye. You don't say it often enough. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Brian and I have like this love-hate relationship, don't we? I love you, Brian. He's already. Hey, see you, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.